All right, imagine this. A battlefield where Polish counts are fighting right alongside Black Haitian soldiers, Irish brigades, you've got it all, clashing with British regulars, and those American revolutionaries holding the line. It sounds like something out of a movie, right?
Mhm.
Just some crazy historical fantasy film. But this was the reality of the American Revolution. And today, we're going to peel back the layers of this story, a story we all think we know. But we're going to discover a global conflict that you might not recognize from those history textbooks.
It really is fascinating how often we just limit our understanding of the revolution to just the 13 colonies and, just a handful of famous battles, when the reality is that the fight for American independence really touched lives and ignited conflicts all across continents.
That's exactly right. And that's what we're diving into today. We're focusing specifically on 1779 and early 1780, a period that really highlights how interconnected this war really was. Our guide for this deep dive is a really captivating episode of the History That Doesn't Suck podcast. Get ready for some surprises.
Yeah, this episode really uncovers the stories of individuals who made choices that shaped the course of history, for better or worse. And we're going to see how the seeds of so many, future political and social divisions were planted during this really tumultuous period. And we're also going to see how the fight for freedom so often involves some really difficult compromises and even moral dilemmas.
Okay, so let's unpack this. And let's start with a story that might challenge some assumptions. December 29, 1778, a slave named Quamino Dawley guides British troops through a secret swamp path outside Savannah, Georgia.
Yeah, and this story immediately throws into sharp relief the different paths to freedom available to Black Americans during the Revolution. While some, in the North found opportunities to fight for the patriot cause and potentially earn their emancipation, many in the South, like Comino, they saw the British as their best chance at liberty.
It's such a stark contrast to that image that we often have of this, unified fight for independence.
Yeah.
I'm really curious to see how this internal conflict over freedom kind of unfolds as we go through this period.
It's definitely a theme that'll reverberate throughout this whole period, this question of who gets to be free and how. It was so central to the revolution, and it would continue to shape the nation long after the war was won. So Comino, his actions, they helped the British capture Savannah, a major blow to the Patriots. And around the same time, you have this much heralded Franco-American alliance. Remember that? Well, it faces its first real test, and it doesn't go so smoothly.
I remember learning about, the French alliance as this really decisive turning point, but it sounds like there was more to the story.
Absolutely. I mean, the alliance, it was vital for the Americans, but it was also fraught with challenges right from the start. Take, for example, the failed Rhode Island campaign in 1778. Combine that with, some simmering tensions between French sailors and those Bostonians, and you have a recipe for disaster. It all kind of culminates in this riot that has lasting diplomatic consequences.
They had a riot? What happened?
Well, during this riot, a French officer, Chevalier de Grasse, he's actually killed. Imagine that, a French officer dying in Boston all because of a brawl. It almost derailed the alliance before it really got going.
That's incredible. It really shows just how fragile that alliance was and
Yeah.
how, seemingly small events could have had these huge repercussions.
Precisely. It underscores the importance of, individual actions and how those cultural differences and even misunderstandings could impact these events on a grand scale. And keep in mind, all of this is happening while the Continental Congress is wrestling with this massive financial crisis.
Ah, yes, the infamous Continental Dollar. It wasn't exactly holding its value, was it?
Not at all. I mean, the Continental Dollar, it was practically worthless. And to make matters even worse, Congress didn't even have the power to tax.
So how did they fund the war effort? I imagine that must have caused some serious problems for George Washington and his troops.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. This financial instability really did have this profound impact on the war effort. It hindered Washington's ability to supply his troops, created this logistical nightmare. But what's even more interesting is that this whole financial crisis laid the groundwork for future political divisions.
So we're already seeing the seeds of those future political battles being planted right here,
Yeah.
right in the middle of the war.
Exactly. And you see figures like Alexander Hamilton emerge. He's advocating for this stronger central government with the power to tax and manage the economy. And then on the other hand, you had folks like Thomas Jefferson, who championed states' rights and this more decentralized approach. These differing visions for the nation's future, they would continue to play out long after the British were defeated.
It's amazing to think that these fundamental debates about the role of government, even economic policy, were already taking shape during the Revolution.
It's a crucial aspect of this period that we often overlook. And while these financial and diplomatic struggles were playing out in cities and meeting rooms, the war on the frontier, oh, that was brutal and complex. This wasn't just about grand armies clashing, it was about settlers, Native American tribes, British forces, all vying for control, often in a very different kind of war.
You know, this aspect of the revolution is often portrayed in very black and white terms. I'm really curious to hear more about the nuances and the complexities of those frontier conflicts.
Yeah, it's a side of the war that's often overshadowed, but it's so important to understand. The frontier conflicts, they were characterized by incredible brutality on both sides, with massacres and scorched earth tactics employed by both Patriot and British Allied forces. It's a stark reminder that wars are rarely clean-cut. You know, there were victims on all sides, and the lines between hero and villain were very often blurred.
What are some specific examples that kind of illustrate this complexity?
Well, one example that really highlights this is the Sullivan Expedition of 1779. General John Sullivan, he was ordered to destroy Iroquois villages in response to attacks on Patriot settlements. While the expedition, it achieved its military objectives, it also resulted in the displacement of thousands of Iroquois people, the destruction of their homes, their crops.
It's a tragic chapter in the war. It really makes you question that true cost of victory and how we balance the need for security with the protection of innocent lives.
Yeah, it's a question that resonates even today. And it's crucial to remember that Native American tribes, they were often forced to choose sides in this conflict, and they faced these devastating consequences regardless of their choice. Their stories, their perspectives, they're so essential for a complete understanding of the revolution. Now, while all this is happening, the war expands even further, with Spain officially joining the fray against Britain in 1779.
And this is where that global aspect of the revolution really comes into focus. What motivated Spain to enter the war? Was it purely just to support the American colonies?
Not exactly. Spain's entry into the war, though as an ally of France and not directly of the United States, but it stemmed from this desire to weaken Britain, right? They saw an opportunity to potentially reclaim territories lost in previous conflicts and to advance their own interests on the world stage.
So it was more of a strategic move to kind of capitalize on Britain's vulnerability at that time.
Precisely. And this decision, it further complicated the whole conflict, broadened its geographic scope. While the American colonies were the primary battleground, the outcome of the war would have repercussions that extended far beyond North America.
It's fascinating to see how all these, seemingly distant events were all interconnected. Speaking of interconnected events, back in North America, the British decided to shift their focus to the South. They believed it to be, more loyalist and a more valuable target. This really marks a significant turning point in the war. But it also brings the issue of slavery even more to the forefront.
You're right. The British, they saw the South as this key to victory, both for its economic resources, particularly those derived from enslaved labor, and also its perceived loyalist sympathies. However, the Southern strategy also brought them into direct contact with the institution of slavery in a way they hadn't experienced before.
So how did this impact the British approach to the war in the South? Did it change their strategy, even their interactions with enslaved people?
It did, absolutely. The British, they started offering freedom to slaves who joined their cause, hoping to disrupt the Southern economy and bolster their own ranks, and this created a complex and really morally challenging situation for Black Americans.
So you had this incredibly complex situation where Black Americans were kind of being pulled in these different directions. Both the Patriots and the British were promising freedom, but with very different motives.
Exactly, and this created this real dilemma for many enslaved people. They had to weigh their options, decide which side, if any, really offered that best chance for a better future. It's a stark reminder that that fight for freedom wasn't just about, national independence, but also about personal liberation.
It makes you think about the weight of those decisions and the impossible choices people were forced to make.
Absolutely. And to further illustrate this point, let's look at two individuals. They embody these really conflicting views on slavery during this period. John Laurens, and we talked about him earlier, Quamino Dawley. Laurens, a slave-owning Southerner, he became a passionate advocate for emancipation and the formation of a Black regiment to fight for the Patriot cause. Dawley, on the other hand, chose to side with the British, hoping to secure his own freedom.
These two individuals really represent such different paths, such different perspectives. What can we learn from their stories?
Well, their stories highlight the diverse perspectives and difficult choices faced by Black Americans during the Revolution. Lawrence, despite his background, he recognized the inherent contradiction of fighting for liberty while upholding slavery. He actively worked to change the system from within. Dolly, through his actions, demonstrates the pragmatic choices that some enslaved people made in their pursuit of freedom, even if it meant siding with the enemy.
It's a reminder that history is full of these nuances, these contradictions, and that individuals, they often operate within these systems and circumstances that are just larger than themselves.
Yeah, and it's by examining these individual stories, these personal struggles, and even triumphs that we can gain this deeper understanding of the broader historical forces at play. Now, shifting our focus back to the Southern campaign, the British strategy led to this major confrontation at Charleston in 1780. The city was teeming with this diverse population, and it was strategically vital to both sides.
Charleston was a major port city, right? I can see why it would be such a coveted prize for both the British and the Patriots. What happened when the British set their sights on Charleston?
Well, the Siege of Charleston, this was a pivotal moment in the war. The British, under Sir Henry Clinton, they meticulously planned their attack, aiming to capture this key port city and deliver a crushing blow to the Patriot cause in the South.
And were they successful?
Yeah, unfortunately for the Patriots, the siege was a success for the British. They laid siege to the city, carefully cutting off the supply lines and bombarding the defenses. It was a tense and terrifying experience for those trapped inside. Ultimately, the Patriots, they were forced to surrender.
I imagine that was a devastating loss.
Oh, it was. The fall of Charleston, this marked the greatest American loss of the entire war. Over 5,000 Patriot soldiers were captured, along with vast stores of weapons and supplies. And this defeat gave the British this significant advantage in that southern theater.
But it sounds like the tragedy didn't end with the surrender. You mentioned a horrifying accident.
Yeah, during the surrender process, this careless accident compounded the whole tragedy. British soldiers, they mishandled these captured American muskets, which were still loaded, and this negligence resulted in this massive explosion. It killed over 200 people. It was a tragic and avoidable loss of life.
It's heartbreaking to think that so many survived the siege only to be killed in such a senseless accident. It really underscores that chaotic and unpredictable nature of war.
Absolutely. And this incident, though it's often overlooked in these historical accounts, it serves as this stark reminder of the human cost of conflict and the importance of even those seemingly mundane precautions in the midst of chaos.
So the loss of Charleston was a significant blow to the Patriots. But the fight in the South, it continued. What happened next?
Well, the fight raged on, and in a smaller engagement shortly after the siege, known as the Battle of Waxhaws, it had this lasting impact on the psychological landscape of the war.
I've heard of Waxhaws, but it's not as well known as some of the other battles. What made it so significant?
Well, the Waxhaws Massacre, as it came to be known, this was a controversial event that further intensified the bitterness and the brutality of the war in the South. It involved a British victory under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Bannister Tarleton, a figure who would become infamous for his aggressive tactics.
So this massacre label, it suggests that something particularly brutal happened. What were the details of the event?
Well, accounts of the Waxhaws incident, they differ. The British claim the Americans fired first while surrendering, while the Americans accused Tarleton of deliberately provoking the massacre. Regardless of who was ultimately responsible, the perceived brutality of this whole event, it galvanized patriot sentiment and really hardened those lines of conflict.
It sounds like this event, regardless of the specific details, became a turning point in how both sides viewed the conflict.
Exactly. The Waxhaws Massacre, it highlights that psychological dimension of warfare. It's not just about military victories and defeats, it's also about shaping perceptions, controlling narratives and ultimately breaking the will of the enemy.
It's a disturbing reminder that propaganda and the manipulation of information have always been tools of war.
It's an important point, and when we consider that brutality we see in these southern campaigns on both sides, it forces us to confront those darker aspects of human nature. Even in the pursuit of these noble ideals like liberty and freedom, war often brings out the capacity for for violence and cruelty.
It certainly challenges that romanticized view of war that we sometimes hold.
And if we connect this back to the bigger picture, it's a reminder that wars are rarely fought solely for these lofty principles. They often devolve into these cycles of violence and retribution, blurring the lines between right and wrong.
So after diving into all of this, what does it all mean for our understanding of the American Revolution? What are some of the key takeaways from exploring 1779 and early 1780?
Well, first, I think it challenges this notion of a clear-cut fight for independence. The reality was far more complex, with shifting alliances, those internal divisions over freedom and slavery, that economic turmoil and a level of brutality that we often overlook.
It's like peeling back the layers of a familiar story and discovering this whole new level of complexity and nuance.
Exactly, and by understanding these complexities, we can gain this more nuanced and accurate view of the American Revolution, one that recognizes both the triumphs and the tragedies, the heroes and the victims.
It's a reminder that history is rarely black and white, but rather this tapestry of competing perspectives and motivations and choices.
Precisely. And it's by grappling with these complexities, by challenging our assumptions and engaging with multiple viewpoints, that we can truly learn from the past and apply those lessons to the present.
Yeah, it really makes you wonder, what those who fought and lived through this period would think of the America that we live in today. Would they be proud of the progress we've made or dismayed by the challenges that remain?
It's such a thought-provoking question, and one that historians and just citizens, they continue to debate, right? The legacy of the American Revolution, it's complex and multifaceted. We see these inspiring achievements, but also these enduring contradictions all kind of woven together.
It's a legacy that we still grapple with today. We're still working to create a more perfect union and striving to live up to those ideals of liberty and equality.
And that's the power of studying history, right? It's not just about remembering the past. It's also about understanding how it shapes the present and informs our choices for the future.
It's like we're having this conversation with the past.
Yeah.
Trying to learn from their experiences and apply those lessons to our own lives.
What's fascinating to me is how the seeds of so many future conflicts and divisions were already being sown during this period. The financial struggles of the Continental Congress, the debates over slavery and emancipation, those tensions between state and federal power. These are all issues that would continue to shape American society for generations to come.
It's like we're witnessing the birth pangs of a nation. The messy and often contradictory process of defining what it even means to be American.
And it's a process that's still ongoing, right? I mean, we continue to grapple with issues of equality and justice, the role of government in our lives.
This deep dive has certainly given me a lot to think about. It's amazing how much history we think we know can be challenged and expanded upon when we take a closer look and consider all these different perspectives.
What stands out to you from this exploration? What resonates most strongly with you?
I think for me, it's the realization that the fight for freedom, it wasn't this monolithic movement, but rather this tapestry of individual stories and motivations. People like Quamino Dali and John Lawrence, both seeking freedom through very different paths. They remind us that history is made up of these countless individual choices, each with its own complexities and consequences.
And it's by examining those individual stories, by delving into those nuances and contradictions of the past, that we can gain this much richer and more meaningful understanding of the forces that shaped our world.
Well said. This deep dive has been a real eye-opener, from swap paths to financial crises, global alliances and brutal massacres. It's clear that the American Revolution was far more than just a fight for independence. It was a crucible that forged a nation, exposed those deep societal divisions, and left a legacy that we continue to grapple with today.
If this deep dive has sparked your curiosity, we encourage you to explore the History That Doesn't Suck podcast. Continue your journey through this fascinating period of history.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.